Hello everyone, welcome you all to the series of MATLAB tutorial. In last session, we have learned about MATLAB decision-making structures, if and switch statements. Now time to shift for the next level learning about the MATLAB loops. Today's topic under MATLAB loops is a for loop. We will begin by talking about the basic information about MATLAB loops. Then we will learn MATLAB for loop, then why for loop syntax while using in programming, and finally nested for loop. And as usual, for your better understanding, I'm gonna keep this session mixed with the theory part along with a live demonstration of the MATLAB scripting examples. Let's start. There may be a situation when you need to execute a block of code several number of times. In general, statements are executed sequentially. The first statement is a function and is executed first, followed by the second, and so on. Programming language provides various control structures that allows for more complicated execution paths. A loop statement that allows us to execute a statement or a group of statements multiple times. And here is the general form of a loop statement in a MATLAB. When it meets for the condition and the condition is true, then the statements or a conditional code get executed and then it start continuously looping. So it continuously check the condition. If the condition is true, then execute the statement. And this is how until the condition is true, it continuously execute that statements written under the condition met. And if the condition is false, then it terminates the program. Now let's learn about MATLAB for loop. A for loop in a MATLAB allows you to execute a block of code repeatedly for a specified number of iterations. It's a fundamental programming construct used to automate repetitive tasks efficiently. MATLAB for loop executes a sequence of statements multiple times and abbreviates the code that manages the loop variable. A for loop is a repetition control structure that allows you to efficiently write a loop that needs to be executed a specific number of times. But the question for loop. Using a for loop in a MATLAB offers several advantages, especially when dealing with the repetitive tasks and large datasets. Here are some key reasons to use for loops in a MATLAB. And the first is automation of repetitive tasks. For loops allow you to automate tasks that needs to be repeated multiple times. This is particularly useful for tasks like data processing, simulations, and iterative calculations. The second is efficient data handling. For loops can efficiently handle large data sets by iterating through arrays, matrices, or other data structures. This makes it easier to perform operations on each element or subset of the data. Third is flexibility and control. You can control the number of iterations and the step size, allowing for precise execution of code. This flexibility is useful for tasks that require specific iteration pattern or conditional execution. The fourth one is the code readability and maintenance. Using for loops can make your code more readable and easier to maintain. By clearly defining the start, end, and step size, you can make your intentions clear to anyone reading your code. And the last one is integration with MATLAB functions. For loops integrate seamlessly with the MATLAB's built-in functions, allowing you to perform complex operations within each iteration. This can include mathematical computations, data manipulation, and much more. These are the reasons to use for loops in the MATLAB. Now let's look for the syntax. We will start with the basic syntax. So basic syntax is very simple. You have to write the keyword for, and then you have to write down the index. When we write the index, we are starting with the value and we are using the double colon and we put the end value. And once we put the index, we have to write the code which we want to execute. Once we write the code to execute under the for, we need to close the or we need to end the for loop. Close means we have to use the keyword that is end. This is a very basic syntax. And here the index actually is the loop control variable. So index it can be I, J, K, L, whatever the loop control variable you want to set, you can use instead of the index. The start value basically is the initial value of the index. Let's say if I write for x is equal to 0 or x is equal to 1, that means my start value is basically the 1. And the end value basically is the maximum value for the index the loop will run until the value is reached. So index is a variable, start value is the initial value of that variable, and the end value is the last value till what you want to run your loop. And this syntax is called a basic syntax. Now, syntax is called a detailed syntax. Here, you can have the simple increment. Okay, so if I write the for loop, how I will write here? For, I will start with the keyword, then index, start value, end value, and then I'm gonna write the code to execute. I need to end the for loop. That's what I will use the keyword end. So, but where this loop increments the index variable by the start value to the end value by default by 1. And this is how uh, this simple increment works. So if I write for instead of index, I write the variable x, and if I write the value 2 and at the end if I write 10, then it will automatically increment from 2, 3, 4, 5. So that is this loop increments the index variable from the start value to the end value by default by 1 if you don't define the step size. And here again, same story, the index is basically the loop control variable. Start value is the initial value of the index. End value is the maximum value for the index. And the loop will run until this value is reached. And the next is a detailed syntax where we can have the custom step size. So I can customize the step size as per my need. I'll start with the keyword for, then index, start value, that step size which I want. If I don't write the step size, then by default the step size is a 1. And then finally we have to write the end value. Then I will write the code to execute and I will end the for loop. And here again, this is important to understand. This loop increments the index variable by step size on each iteration. So it's in my control what step size I want to increment my for loop. I can put 2, 3, 4, and if I don't write anything, even I can put 1. But if I don't write anything, then automatically it increments by 1. So index basically is the loop control variable. Start value is the initial value of the index. Step size is the size of the index which we want to increment by. And the end value is the maximum value for the index. The loop will run until this value is reached. And next is the detailed syntax. And the third, that is the array of values. So here again, I'll start with the keyword for, then I'll write index and I'll set some array here and go to execute. And I will end this for loop. And this loop indicates over each element in the array. So instead of having the end values, you can just have the array of values as well, and it will iterate over each element in the array. Now time for the MATLAB scripting. We will go through the indexing examples for simple increment, custom step size on array of value. Let's jump to the MATLAB. Now let's see the for loop MATLAB examples. We have seen there are different ways of indexing the for loop, and we have also seen in the theory for that the simple increment, and then we can have the custom step size of the index increment, and the last one is the array of values. And I'm gonna show you or showcase you the all three examples. So let's start with the for loop. So here the code is written already to save your time, and I'm gonna read each section and how I'm gonna show you how the for loop works. So writing the for loop, the first example is a simple increment, and this loop will increment the index by default by value 1, and it is starting with the initial value and will end with the last value. And the step size will be by default 1 because we are not defining the step size here. How you gonna write? You gonna write the keyword for, then indexing variable, that is the I have written here, start value and the end value, and this is double colon. This is how you can write. So this for loop will initially, it will take the 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. Why it is incrementing by 1? Because we have not mentioned any step size here. Let's run this section and see how it works. Control enter. In the result, you can easily see here, it started with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On each iteration, I am displaying this. And when it end, when it reach to the last value. Let's take the 7 and run this code. Control enter. So it started with, if you see here, it started with 1, 2, 3, 4, right? This 4, 5 is the previous value. So it started here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But the increment is 1. The reason is we have not defined here the step size, and that's the reason this loop will increment the index by default by 1 from the 1 to the last value, that is a 7 here, or the earlier 5 was there. So I'm gonna keep this 5 back, and this is the simple example. It's very simple to understand and to implement. Now the next example is a custom step size where you can define the step size at what rate you want to increment. This loop increments the index by 2, displaying odd numbers from 1 to 9. So I'm incrementing because I started with 1. It will then increment by 2. That means 3 it will come. Then in the next iteration it will come 5, and that way it will go till it reaches to the last value of the for loop to execute. It's the end value. Once it will indexing will reach to the 10, it will end the for loop. So let's run this section and see how the custom step size works in the indexing. So here you see the results. So I'm gonna clear this everything, and then again I'm gonna run this. So here you can see it started with the initial value 1, then 3, 5, 7, 8, 7, 9. I'm gonna keep this 3, then you can see how it increments. Let's run this section. Then you can see here 1, it is incremented by 3, that's 4, then incremented by 3, that's 7, then again incremented by 3, that will reach 10, and the for loop is end here because the last value or the end value of the indexing is 10. And this is the use case of the custom step size, very simple. And the last example is array of values where the loop iterates over the specified values of the arrays. So this loop iterates over the specified array values. Very simple. Instead of the first value and the last value, you're gonna set the array the way you want. Okay. And then you can display that value. So let me run this section. Before running, let me clear. Okay. And now run this. Control enter. These are the array values, and this indexing has taken that values. If I write like this 4, and if I run this section again, 1, 4, 5, 7. 7 was the previous value. So 1, 4, 5, 7. Now I gonna do like this, and I gonna run this. Now you see, still it has taken the 1, 6, 5, 7. So that is the beauty with the array of values indexing. You can write the value the way you want to point your indexing to the variable. Now you have learned how the basic for loop works, and you can start writing your program. Now time for the nested for loop. MATLAB allows to use one loop inside the another loop, and that is called nesting way of using the loop. Syntax for the nested for loop is very simple, and here is the syntax. We are starting with the keyword for, and I'm setting the outer index. Why outer index? But this is my first for loop, which would be the outer of the inner for loop. Then I'll state the start value and the end value. And next is my inner for loop. I will start with the keyword, and then I'll write inner index and the start value for the inner for loop and the end value. And here to code to execute. Once we write the code to execute, we need to end the inner for loop first, and then we need to end the outer for loop. And here, important is inner index and the outer index are basically the loop control variables. Start value are the initial values of the index, and end value are the maximum value for the index the loop will run until the value is reached. So here are a few examples of a nested for loop in the MATLAB to help you understand how they works. Let's see how the nested for loop works. Already the program is created. I'm gonna open this. The first example, I'm creating the multiplication of the table, and this example generate a multiplication of the table from the number which started with the 1 and ending with the last value, that is 5. And these are the way of writing the program. If you want to make it scalable, you can keep the variable and you can keep changing this variable. No need to touch into the loop. So it will automatically consider the end value from that variable. So here n is equal to 5 is the defining the step size of the table. And here I'm doing the nested for loop to create the multiplication of table. And here is the outer for loop. The indexing is starting with the variable I. First value is 1 and the end value is 5. This is a nested for loop, that is the inner for loop. Indexing variable is j. Start value, initial value is 1 and the end value is taken from the variable 5, that is the variable n, that is a 5. And here in the each step, when initially it started with the 1, j is 1, this I will be 1, j will be 1, and at the 1 1 at the result array, it will store at the first row, at the first column, the multiplication will be 1 into 1. For the next iteration, when the this n will get incremented, the inner n will get incremented. That means 1, it will reach to the 2. That means j will be 2, 2 into 1. At the first row and the second column, the value will be 2. Sequentially, it will reach to the continuously, once it will continuously run, it will reach to the 5, all elements, and it will do the multiplication. So let's run this section and see the results. I'm gonna use the control enter keyword from the keyboard, and here you can get the results. So 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5, and here every time the way the code is written, you're gonna get the multiplication. Okay. So this is how the nested for loop to create the multiplication table. Simple example. And the next example I wanted to create here is, let me clear the workspace, clear the command window. Okay. Now the another example is summing element of a matrix, and this example calculate the sum of each element in a 3 by 3 matrix. So let's see how it is written. The first here I'm defining the matrix, that the size of the matrix is 3 by 3. If I select this section and if I run, even I can do like this, evaluate this section of the selection, and at this moment the values are not assigned. That's what it's showing the error, unrecognized function. But if I select this and if I evaluate this, then you can see the value or how the matrix 3 by 3 matrix is created. And then there is one another variable called total underscore sum is equal to 0. This is the initializing the sum variable. Initially, I'm setting that value as 0. And here I'm starting with the nested for loops for sum the elements. This is the outer for loop. I is the indexing variable. Initial value is 1. And then the end value I'm defining as a size of the matrix. Here the size of the matrix is 3 by 3. And I'm taking with the first column, and then here the j is the indexing variable for the inner for loop. 1 is the start value and size of matrix, and the second row, the second column. And here I'm adding that is the initial is the 0, that sum variable declared, and here I'm moving this indexing from 1 to the defined size of the matrix. And accordingly, what this line actually do, this line specifies that you want the size of the first dimension, that is the number of rows actually. So that is the one is the number of rows, And here the two specifies that you want the size of the second dimension, that is the number of column. And here I'm doing the total sum. And at the end, I'm displaying that. So this function display number to string basically I used. That means it displays the total sum. And number to string is a function in the MATLAB which converts. This is a function, inbuilt function of the MATLAB, and it converts the number to the character array. And that is called the string basically. So let's run this section and see the results. Before running, I'm gonna clear this command window as well as gonna clear the workspace. Now I'll run this section, control enter, and you see the sum is 45. So if I add this 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9, you're gonna get the sum as 45. Let's check. I'm gonna change this variable by 1. That is incremented by 1 is a 10. Earlier it was 9. The sum should be 46 if I run this section. So let me run this part of the code and you can see the sum is reached 46 because I incremented the last element from this 3 by 3 matrix from 9 to 10. That is one incremental done. And that's the reason the sum also incremented by the one. So this is how the programming is working. And it's up to you how you can or use nested for loop for your purpose. So these examples should give you a good starting point for using the nested for loops in a MATLAB. After watching this video, I'm pretty sure that you understood what is the for loop in MATLAB and how it works in the nested form as well. If you really like this session, then please give this video a thumbs up. To watch more videos like this one, please consider subscribing. Once you hit subscribe button, you're gonna get the notification anytime new contents like that comes out. And lastly, if you have any queries on this topic, you wanna answer me, leave me your comments below. I read them all. That's all I have for you today. Hope you enjoyed and hope to see you next time. Bye bye.